Now it's time for today's perspective, and we're talking on Perspective today about protests and the origins of modern-day demonstrations. Well, perhaps they come from one major protest that was held here in France. Now, it happened back in 1971. You'll see some images of it in just a moment, when the French government announced a huge extension of a military base on the Larzac plateau in southern France. Now, the resulting protests were then perhaps pioneering regional radicalism for years to come, and the author of the book Make Cheese Not War, Transnational Resistance and the Larzac in Modern France is in fact a regular guest here on France 24. Andrew Smith, who often analyses French politics for us, joins us now. Great to have you with us, Andrew, today. Rather different circumstances, actually talking about something you've written for once. I mean, tell us first of all about this 1971 protest.
Absolutely. Well, I think one of the things that's really important is the relationship between the state, the centre and the regions. As you mentioned, in 1971, that was the moment that the plan to expand the army base, the military base on the Larzac Plateau was made by then Minister of the Army, Minister of Defence, Michel Debré. And he talked about the fact there were a few peasants there. He said they were living there much as they'd had since the Middle Ages. He said he called it French Siberia and said that even crows took a backpack to cross the plateau. And that's one of the things that people suddenly reacted to because they felt, written out of history. They felt dictated to. They felt actually as if this change had been made despite them, and they were reduced to numbers on a page. And what happens very quickly in 1971 is people start to try and make arguments. They talk about how, a lot of these farmers are young people, many of them under 40. They've got, new types of technology. There's a very famous machine, a rotolactor for milking ewes, the sheep that make the milk that makes Roquefort cheese. And they try and make the argument on those terms. But what becomes very clear is actually those aren't going to wash. The argument needs to be made quite differently. And that's when really very different styles of protest start to happen. The farmers come together, they swear an oath on a Bible in Easter 1972 that they will never be forced from their will from their land against their will. And actually that's really where you start to see them forging all of these different kind of alliances effectively, building networks of support and really demonstrating the symbolism, the meaning of that protest. They work with anti-militarists, with pacifists, they work with land-based protests all over France, but all over Europe and all over the world as well. And it becomes a real kind of hub, a real window of contestation when people find new things they can find to teach them about resistance, new types of models of mobilization. And I think that's really something that's quite important. This is a land-based protest, but actually these farmers get their message out across the world. They work with others. And one of the phrases I try to use in this is rough-handed solidarity. It's about people meeting each other, a handshake where they recognize in each other someone that works the land, someone they can work with, not being dominated by political forces, by revolutionary parties or anything like that, but finding, really people they can work with from different movements right across the world.
Oh, it's great. It's really great hearing you talking about it and watching the images at the same time, Andrew. I mean, as you say, it's a very, very specific protest, isn't it? But something that you say it's really kind of a template for even right up to modern day protests.
Absolutely. I mean, this could, in one sense, be a micro-history of a, small land-based protest in southwest France. But in the first instance, in 1972, they take their tractors to Rodez. Then in the winter, of course, in the winter of 1972, they take their sheep to graze under the Eiffel Tower. And later, in early 1973, they take their tractors to Paris. Only at the start of this year, we've seen the kind of the model of those tractor marches on Paris be so compelling, such a disruptive, sign of the rural world refusing to be marginalized in the center in Paris's capital. But also what I think is important is the way that they engage with people all over the world. So very importantly, after the protest is successful in 1981, François Mitterrand, who's been on the plateau at various times during the campaign, grants the stay of execution. He cancels the base expansion plan in 1981 when he's elected. But that's not the end of it, because they go out and they're working with, for example, autonomists in New Caledonia. And people like Jean-Marie Thibau, the kind of autonomous leader of Kanaki, is there on the Larzac meeting with peasants, talking about how the lessons of the Larzac taught him how to use non-violence to try and push for the aim of autonomy in New Caledonia. They go to, French-speaking Africa, to the USA, to London, to Belgium, to Brussels. They're in Japan at Hiroshima. This is a globe-trotting movement, but it's not just posters and slogans. This is people mucking in, trying to help other land-based movements and find that type of connection where they can. And I think that's really the lesson that we have to see in this, the idea of micropolitics, but also this idea of a sort of rooted cosmopolitanism, of understanding that people are different, but sometimes that difference can be really the spur for action conducted in common. And I think that's maybe the lesson for those contemporary movements. Rooting struggles in the land, finding the stories that connect people and the messages that can communicate that, and seeing how far beyond that we can see really a type of common struggle where people want to push for food sovereignty, ideas of sustainable production, and also a connection with the communities in which they live and work the land.
Andrew, let's bring it right up to date. I mean, we've got presidential elections, of course, coming up here in France in a year's time. This is something you are regularly talking about here on France 24. I mean, the farming vote is crucial, isn't it, amid what still is, despite some setbacks, some might say, in the local elections, a swing towards the far right here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the big things we can see from current politics is just how unpopular the Mercosur deal has been. There's this big agricultural treaty, the big trade treaty with South America. And in particular, the agricultural aspects of it are what has animated much of the French farming community. You saw just a few moments ago on screen images of José Bové, of course, one of the activists during the period, then a leading figure in Confédération Paysanne, and then later, of course, a presidential candidate and MEP for many years. One of his big campaigns was around food sovereignty, around sustainable production, around the idea that food is produced in a way that actually we recognise it, that it benefits communities, that it isn't industrial and chemically polluted and all the rest of it. And I think that idea of food sovereignty is one that we can see really animating people when we see something like the Mercosur deal being so unpopular. Now, of course, there are other issues around kind of green tariffs, around pesticides. It's all much more complicated than that. But at the heart of it, the idea of food we recognise from places we understand that benefits people, communities and nations, I think is an important thing to stand for. And that has to be one of the messages that comes from the Larzac. Understanding patterns of production, understanding connections to the land, but not using that to close off movements or to be exclusive or to shut down and emphasise difference, but using that as the start of a story, the start of a connection, the start of an opportunity to work together for a more hopeful future.
Andrew, we're running out of time, but there's something I really wanted to ask you. I mean, I can see behind you on the wall there, you even got Larzac posters. I mean, what is it that made you interested in this in the first place? It's 1971, it's quite a while ago now. What was the passion that sort of sparked your interest?
Well, there's a number of different reasons. I mean, I grew up reading Asterix comics. I wrote my first book on wine growers in the region nearby. I even supervised an excellent undergraduate dissertation on the Larzac that made me want to look at it even further. But really, it's this idea of a land-based protest, one that moves out and looks beyond it and translates those ideas. It helps. I wrote my first book on wine. I was then looking at things that produced cheese. On the Larzac, they said, "Faites labour," make labour, do work, not war. But actually that was translated onto placards in protests in London as "make cheese, not war." The ideas translated across borders, the idea of what they stood for. And so for me, the idea of the cheese is at the centre of it. And it helps us understand and access why people were so willing to support something that said this is about sustainable food production, about sustainable communities, and about change that can support hopeful futures.
Well, always good to talk about cheese and wine on the programme. Anything that involves either of those two is perfect for me. Andrew, good to have you with us once again here on France 24. Andrew Smith there, he's the author of Make Cheese Not War, Transnational Resistance and the Larzac in Modern France. Good to have you with us on the programme. There you go, there's the front of the book cover for you.